Welcome to Momversations on the Win-Win Women platform, where we women gather to care, connect, and collaborate. Truly a win-win for us all. It is always our goal here at Momavate to keep calm and mom on. I'm your hostess, Reagan Barnes. I am a mom of 8 and founder of the nonprofit organization Momavate that empowers you to elevate your mothering experience. Joining us today is Denise Medved. We are so glad to welcome her and welcome you, Mom. You are joining us. We are so glad to have you both, Denise, and you too. We welcome you into the Mama Bay community, or Mom Unity, as we like to say. Together, we enrich motherhood. As we answer the question, what do moms do with this uplifting statement? Moms raise up society. That's right. Not just our own kids, but all of society, including ourselves, are uplifted by the work of intentional mothers. Because as moms, we are uniquely positioned to influence society one on one in each of the 7 categories of this acronym. Today, we are going to welcome Denise she is a fellow Win-Win Women show host with a show right here on this same platform. And we're so happy to have her here with us. Denise, would you just start out by telling us a little bit about your background? I read your bio on your website, and I thought one question we could kind of start with is you grew up watching 2 different models of aging. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I grew up in a little rural farm area called Raccoon Valley, Tennessee.
Oh my goodness, that sounds rural.
Fun. And so I had a very beautiful childhood. My mom was what I would call a brainiac. She read books, at least a book every week. And I always say real books, not something light and lighthearted, but real books about science and life and experiments and animals. She read about all kinds of things. And she did crossword puzzles. She did word games. She played the piano. She was the church pianist for 63 years in the community. And she was constantly studying, learning. She was a substitute school teacher. And however, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And at the time, that was in 2002, at the time, they said that if you did crossword puzzles and word games and took courses and played the piano, you would not get any kind of cognitive decline. And so I was shocked, and I right away questioned, this cannot be true, because no one is a better model of studying, learning, stimulating her brain than my mom. So it made me curious to look and start to do research about the brain and how it could possibly get Alzheimer's. My dad was a sculptor and an artist. And one day he decided he could sculpt his own body the same way he sculpted clay. And he became a bodybuilder, and he became Mr. Tennessee, Mr. Wisconsin, Mr. Dixie. He was best back at abdominals and Mr. America and Mr. Universe. And so what happened is I watched someone who was very sedentary and liked to read all the time and study and was not physically active, and someone who spoke English as a second language and was a bodybuilder and did gymnastics and did exercise all the time, but didn't like to read or study or do word games. It was difficult for him to translate those things. And as I started to study, I learned that the best exercise to keep the brain healthy, they now know, is physical exercise, and specifically exercise that causes you to think about what you're doing while you do it. And what I mean by that is if you're on, I'm not bashing these forms of exercise because they're heart and some of your muscles, but if you do the treadmill or the rowing machine or or walk with or if you do the stairmaster, and you don't have to think about what you're doing, you're just doing it repetitively. You might even be having a conversation with someone else, or you might be listening to something on your ear pods, or you might be listening to watching television while you do it. That is not very good for your brain. It's good for your muscles and your cardiovascular system. But when you're doing something, even if it's simple and you're trying to figure it out, like, how do I do that? And kids do this all the time. They are constantly discovering new things about how they can move. Every mom listening, yep, you know that every mom listening has watched their child say, watch me hop on one leg, mom. Watch me walk backwards, mom. Watch me turn a cartwheel, mom. Or watch me throw this ball. See how far I can throw it? So kids accidentally, part of being a kid from the time you're born until late teens or early 20s, are constantly experimenting with physical movement. And because they're experimenting with something they don't really know how to do, or they're trying to get themselves to be better at it, or they're trying to figure out a new way to do it, they are activating neurons, which are brain cells, and they're actually stimulating the process of neuroplasticity in the brain. And that means the ability to change your brain and central nervous system and develop it further, make it sharper, make it quicker, make it have a longer vitality, make it something that is creative and expanding all the time. And so for years, Reagan, they actually thought that once you were 7 or 8 years old, that your brain didn't change anymore. Because when they would do tests and they would start to look at older adults, they would see very little change at all. But when they did tests on a child, they would see lots of change. And it turns out it wasn't because the brain stopped growing and changing. It was because we stopped doing things that were experimental and fun and interesting and intriguing and challenging to our body, which was what caused our brain to actually develop and grow. So we actually have a lot of input, not only on our own brains or the brains of our parents and loved ones who might be having some kind of memory or cognitive issue, but we have a huge amount of impact on the brains of our children.
Wow. Well, that is exciting. Yeah. And we can only really have full impact if we understand that truth about those things. Yeah.
So I always make a joke and say that none of our mothers ever said to us, why don't you go outside and fire a few neurons? But that's actually what we're doing when we're learning something new physically. We're learning how to play in a team. We're learning how to throw with a person. We're learning how to ride a bike. All of those things are causing the brain to be stimulated because the child doesn't know how to do it already. So as we get older, unfortunately, what we do is we tend to what I call specialize. We become tennis players. We say, I'm good at tennis and I like it, so I'm going to play tennis 3 times a week, every week. And then that no longer fires as many neurons because now we're getting good at it. We have a neural pathway that says, I know how to do this. And we tend to specialize as we get older, so we don't fire as many neurons unless we actively make a choice to do things that are new, that are challenging, different than we've ever done. Same thing with our children, our teenagers, our college age children.
We need to kick ourselves out of our comfort zone sometimes and go do something new and different.
Absolutely. And sadly, word games and puzzles don't do that. They've actually proven it without a doubt by many thousands, hundreds of thousands of research studies. We used to think, board games and card games and crossword puzzles would help. But unfortunately, there are 5 functions in the brain, and all 5 have to be stimulated in order to have a healthy brain. And so playing cards, doing crossword puzzles, etc., only activate 1 or two of those functions. And I like to compare it to brushing your teeth. If you only brush your front teeth for a few years, what's going to happen to your whole mouth? Something not so good. So same thing, you only exercise a couple functions brain over and over. It makes you really good at puzzles and games, but it does not prevent your brain from declining or deteriorating.
That's an important, that's a fair analogy, I think, a good metaphor. My mom actually had a stroke over the last weekend, and I think that's very helpful for me to understand as I'm watching her go through the different rehab that there are. They do, I think, try to address the different parts of the brain because there's different rehab people who come in and serve different purposes for her as she's overcoming this. I feel like we as moms are sometimes we're in the middle of the sandwich. We have our own parents that we care for. And so knowing this information can be helpful on that piece of the bread. And then we've got our children on the other piece of the bread as far as this time frame of our lives when we are possibly providing care both for the older and the younger generation.
Absolutely, that's a great analogy, and not only can it be challenging to be a caregiver on both sides, but sometimes what that does is it causes us to ignore ourselves. We're so busy taking care of our parents and our children, and it's very important to keep your brain really healthy in your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, as well as when you're older and when you're younger. And the reason for that is something that people don't think about very much, although now the brain has become a big topic, a big issue that is being talked about more than ever. Something we don't think about very often is the fact that our brain literally controls everything. It's like a motherboard in a computer, or it's like the electric panel in your house. It controls everything. So if something goes wrong, you need to go back to the brain and say, what is happening here? Is it a physical issue? Is it an emotional issue? The brain produces proteins and hormones. Moms that are in that sandwich are probably also perimenopausal or menopausal. And guess what? Hormones is what cause menopause, and lack of hormones, excessive hormones. And guess where it comes from? It comes from the brain. So there's so many things that we don't tend to think about that affect us as moms and affect us as daughters and as mothers and spouses that we can trace back to the brain. Obviously, when there is a physical issue, many times we also even think of that. It's like, oh, there's something wrong with my hand. Oh, there's something wrong with my knee. In reality, important is the neuroscience behind why is that knee not working well? Why is that hand not working well? Because more and more physical therapists, exercise physiologists, occupational therapists for all ages are starting to look at how can we stimulate the brain to have, because muscle memory is actually not so much muscle memory as it is brain memory. And to that. So how can we stimulate the brain to help this part of the body heal or function better or perform better or develop more well to serve us? And so the brain is actually becoming not that it's becoming, it's that we're becoming aware of the fact that the brain is actually really central to our overall health and well-being from a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual place and point of view.
That's great. Yeah. And to try to understand all of those areas and how the physical can impact those things as we physically play, so to speak. And that's even what we decided that we would entitle this talk, right? Is play, and how critical that is, how vital it is to any brain, whether it's our children's brains. And that's where we tend to think of playing is in childhood. Right. But I think we need to learn too as adults and older, mature adults to keep playing a bit. What would you recommend as far as healthy playing type of things
Well, let me give you a quote first, because I just think it's interesting. And that quote is by George Bernard Shaw, not a neuroscientist, not a doctor, but a playwright. And he said, "We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing." And I just love that quote, because it's important that we all play. And he understood that somehow, that it's important that we all play. Now, there are lots of ways to play, obviously. But again, the important thing to remember to affect your brain is that you want it to be physical play. It's great to play, as I said, a card game or a board game, or read a great book and feel like you're playing hooky from the day because you're taking time out to read. Those are all wonderful, nourishing things for you, but they do not stimulate and support the brain the same way as physical movement. And again, it has to be something that causes you to think. So as simple as doing something like taking a different route when you drive to work and say, "Ooh, I always go this way. What if I turned right instead of left? What if I went all the way around the block and then went?" Because that's causing you to think differently about, when do I put my signals on? When do I put the brake on? That's a simple analogy of something you can do that can stimulate your brain. Certainly doing simple things that you do every day with the non-dominant hand. If you normally reach up in the top shelf and get your glasses out with your right hand, well, what happens if you reach up with your left hand and get those glasses out? All those things are teeny little moments of play. And then, of course, there's always the play, doing some sporting activity or playful activity that we like. But once again, if it's something that we're pretty good at or we do fairly frequently, it's not going to be nearly the same as if you've never been clogging before and you decide to take a clogging class. Now that's real play, because your brain is saying, "Oh my gosh, how do I do this? I don't know how to clog. I'm going to learn how, and I'm going to laugh and have a good time." And part of the fun of play, as you know, especially as a mom of 8, that when kids are playing and having a good time, they laugh. And of course, laughter stimulates the production of certain hormones in the brain that are uplifting, meaning dopamine, endorphins, all different kinds of serotonin, things that happen in the brain that are stimulated by laughter, for example, that are stimulated by movement. And so it not only helps our brain feel better, but it helps us have a more positive attitude and a more stress-free way of living our lives. Now, the program that have been developing, I did 7 years of pilot programs and research in a top 100 hospital, and I worked in all departments. I worked in the departments of sports rehabilitation and gerontology and pediatrics, and you name it. Every hospital department tried the Ageless Grace brain health program, and the same program, really, just a different name so that kids can. It's called Forever Fit for Kids, but it's based on 21 tools or exercises that you do physically that stimulate all 5 functions of the brain. And yes, you could figure out how to stimulate all 5 functions. And yes, you could do things on your own, like the things I mentioned earlier, to stimulate those functions. But this program was put together because the truth is, all of us don't want to be research scientists and figure out what to do, and especially moms who have children who
busy doing other things. Yeah,
exactly. So what most of us like to do is go to a program that's already put together for us and follow that program, so that we don't have to invent the wheel ourselves or reinvent the wheel ourselves. So the Ageless Grace Brain Health Program is for all ages, and the children's program is called the number 4, Ever Fit for Kids, spelled KIDZ. And so it's 21 different exercises, as I said. And what I was thinking is I'd love to show a few of these so that the moms watching can say, "Gee, that's pretty interesting. I might be able to do that with my child." And we do have a DVD, which I'll talk about later, but it's especially focused, and so will the exercises I'm doing today, at 5 to 12-year-olds. Younger kids can do it. Older kids can do it. Those of you who have middle schoolers and teenagers know that they don't always like to do what you suggest for them to do, and they're not likely to do things that they feel will make them look silly in front of their peers. So this is really focused at 5 to 12-year-olds.
Okay,
So,
yes, I would love that.
Go back and sit in this chair so they can see my full body. It's right behind me, and see some of the exercises that I'm going to show them. So these are all done seated, which is regardless of age, whether you're 5 years old or 105 or somewhere in between, we do these seated. And the reason is, if I'm going to ask you to do certain things or stimulating your imagination and your brain, there are things that you might normally do standing up. And so the second we ask you to do them, even though they're simple and playful, why your brain says, oh, how would I do? Still stay in my chair. So that's part of the fun of it, is to figure out how to do it. Now, we do this to music, and the reason we do it to music is because everybody of all ages like music, right? Everybody likes it. So I'm going to just play a couple songs that are focused at children, that were written by a friend of mine, and the names of them are funny things like I Want to Have Dog Breath and Read a Book, and I'm Just Human Being, and those kinds of things. They're all fun names. I've got an elephant in my nose. I'm a little cookie, those kinds of names. So this first one we're going to do is one that is called Team Fit. I want to have dog. And this is I Want to Have Dog Breath. And we're going to pretend we're playing sports. So let's dribble a basketball. And even 5-year-olds have a good idea of how to dribble a basketball. And the fun thing is that when we imagine we're doing something, we always imagine we're doing it perfectly, right? Now let's get a little creative with it, and let's dribble under one leg and dribble under the other leg. Dribble around to the side of your chair. Go back under your legs. And how about if we shoot the basketball into the basket? Shoot, but don't get out of your chair. Shoot it into the basket. And then let's try another sport. How about roller skating? Let's roller skate a little bit. Except we're not just any kind of roller skater. We're a speed skater. So let's go really fast and skate as fast as we can. And then let's imagine that we're swimmers, and let's sit back in our chair and paddle our feet in front, because we can't paddle them in back, and stay in the chair. And then let's do our stroke. This is a crawl. And depending on your experience or the age of your child, they might know how to do the breaststroke, right? Or maybe the backstroke. Who likes to roll in dirty, then shake all over mama's right. And then for dessert he eats a bug. Now, how about if we're joggers? Let's go jogging. One more time, that's all. Or what if we were riding a bicycle? Maybe your kids know how to ride a bicycle, and maybe they don't. But this is almost as much work as actually doing the real thing. Or how about if we go rowing in a boat? Let's row. And let's pan again. So part of the fun is thinking about what sport you want to do next, because you only spend just a little while doing each sport. Now you could also take one sport the entire length of a song, but the average song is about 3.5 minutes long. And so you do that exercise or tool, and that particular one we did was called Team Fit, and it's all about sports. And you could do one sport through the whole 3.5 minute song. But what it's doing, it's causing your brain to say, okay, stop now, and we're going to play another song and do something different. So I'm going to just tell you about a few more. because I didn't want to take a lot of time, but I wanted to give you that idea so you can see, and it's appropriate for boys, girls, anyone can do Team Fit. So one of the things, isn't it fun? And it's imagination, and it's done by older people too, because as simple as those things were, our brain was firing neurons like crazy because it was saying, oh, how do I swim in a chair? Oh, how do I shoot a basketball from a chair? So another thing you can do is called spelling bee, and literally you find a word or a whole bunch of words, and you spell that word by printing in block letters with your nose, and then you spell that word with your elbow and the other elbow. You spell it with your belly button. You spell it with your back or your foot in the air, spelling the word, or different words. Like you could say, let's all spell your first name. Or you could say, let's all spell as many fruits, vegetables as we can think of. So you might spell apple with one arm and apple with the other, and then spell orange with your belly button and broccoli with your foot. So there's so many fun things you can do. Another one is called gentle geometry, and most kids that are 5 or 6 don't even know what geometry is, but it has a lot to do with shapes like triangles, circles, and lines. So we try to draw a circle with one hand, a triangle with the other foot, and a line with the other hand, and it's impossible, but you just keep trying. You don't give up. And then you switch and mirror it on the other side. So those are just 3 of the tools: gentle geometry, spelling bee, and Team Fit, that you could do with your child or with your mom, either one, and for yourself, because it is fun. It's silly. It causes you to laugh. And don't forget to use the belly button to spell and draw circles and lines, because it's funny. It gives you some humor. And I don't know, is this a good time to tell everybody about how to access the website?
Yes, we have a slide that shows the website. So we will pull that slide up. So it's going to show your logo, the Ageless Grace logo. And is that still the right website also for the Forever Fit for Kids?
Yes, Forever Fit for Kids is on there also. And we have DVD sets of 3 DVDs and a playbook, not a workbook, but a playbook, and flashcards that we use for the adults. But of course, you can also use the playbook for ideas to work with your children, the flashcards. And then there's a separate for children, and it's called Forever Fit for Kids. And on the DVD, we have 12 children ages 5 to 12 of all sizes, all shapes, all colors, all abilities, and they are doing the 21 tools of Ageless Grace. And it's set up so that your child can access that really quickly by playing it in an external hard drive or playing it on a DVR player. And they can do one tool at a time. They can hop around and do the last tool first and then another tool. And it's really lots of fun. As a matter of fact, I have a lot of grandmothers who say, I really like the kids' DVD better than the one for grown-ups.
Oh, great. Well, that is exciting. Thank you so much for all of your information and even taking time to show us those things. And I hope that as we are wrapping this up, that our viewers have taken the time to write down a lot of this good information. Take a moment if you need to that's really like the first gear here in the set of gears. One action will lead to another, and the first one is to write that down. Any of those key points that stuck out to you as we've been listening to this wonderful expert. And remember that you can find her shows as well on the Women platform. So in order for these things to activate in our lives, we need to take that time to write things down. And I just want to say thank you again. This half hour has gone by so fast, but it is time to end our recording and start our live interaction with our viewers. So if you've been watching this as a recording, Thank you for watching. Be sure to catch our live show every Saturday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, so you can participate also in the second half hour where we can do a conversation with you unrecorded. We want to include you in the discussion. That's how win-win is unique. We care, we connect, we collaborate.